Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2019 horror anthology film Return to Horror Hotel. A film that is directed by Ricky Hess and Brandon Thaxton and stars Baby Norman, J. Michael Gray, R.C. Sawyer, Stephanie Stevens, Anne-Marie Gideon and Katina Ratic. Right. I like anthology films, generally speaking. I like when they're done well. You can get these short 20-minute films and they can, you get straight into it, usually horror, straight into the horror, and they can be really, really effective when they're done properly. And that's what I like about them. They're short and sweet, and you don't have to have a huge attention span sometimes. They're quite easy films to chill out to. And then there's Return to Horror Hotel, which unfortunately is a fairly dismal example of a horror anthology film. Now, we have 4 stories here. You don't have bookends here. You don't have a story that runs through. The story essentially is this hotel, the horror hotel. And it's just like one of those cheap hotels that you see in movies all the time, where the people stop off at, and they've got these, cheap hotel. It's one of those basically. It's not exactly an inspired location for a horror anthology film. And we have 4 stories, and the first story is called Sleep Tight, which is essentially a story about bedbugs that are growing to enormous sizes, and they're being harvested for some venom that they have by one of the guests in the hotel, and he's selling that as drugs. And he's harvesting these bugs in his body, in his partner's body. It don't make a lot of sense. And there's a bodybuilder in another room who may or may not be causing them to grow big because he's a bodybuilder and he's on steroids. And there's a woman with 2 kids in another room. And it's okay. Some of the effects are pretty terrible. And some of the acting is of the same quality. It didn't do an awful lot for me, I have to say, this story. Not very original, and it just, the horror elements just didn't work. The second story was called Guillotine, and this was again set in the hotel, and a woman and her, I'm guessing it's her assistant, turn up to the hotel to do a deal with some guy who has a valuable and rare piece of jewellery that all the most beautiful women in Hollywood and stuff have worn in the past, like Marilyn Monroe, I think they say, and a few others. And when they wear this jewellery, they become like, all their dreams come true, and they become everything they want to be, and they become a star, basically. And this woman will do anything to acquire this piece of, well, it's not a piece of jewellery, it's a piece of wood. And the guillotine thing is the fact that it was in the French Revolution, it was attached to a guillotine, whatever. And it's this ugly piece of wood that when they put around the neck, on the cut line, they become this star and this everything they want to be. And that's it. That's the story, really. There's no real horror elements here, other than, as you can imagine, the woman and her assistant bicker and fight over who's going to get this necklace, and that's it. The third story is called Time for Love. Again set in the hotel, and there's a naval officer who is in some kind of time loop, and this woman turns up to deliver a book who gets injured, so ends up going in his hotel room, and she gets caught in the time loop as well. And it's 15 minutes of them talking and him getting increasingly older very, very quick, and the room rotting around him because he's in a time loop. He's from the Second World War or something, and that's it. No horror here at all in that one. And the fourth story, The Hand of Houdini, had potential, but the acting was so dismal, and the effects were so dismal. When you actually see this hand, I actually laughed out loud. It was like this box, and then when they're being like haunted by this Hand of Houdini, and you can see this clearly that someone has stuck their hand through the cupboard and through this box and like had these like dangly nails on it, and it was honestly it was like somewhat from your local Halloween party. It was really bad. So I did think this story had potential, but it was terribly executed, The Hand of Houdini. So those are the 4 stories that you get. None of them done particularly well. Fairly, it's very low. It's pretty low budget film. This I will say, very low budget. So do with that as you will, if you like. But it doesn't excuse, if you like, some of the execution of some of these stories. I don't think the lack of horror for a horror anthology film is stark. Really, it reminded me some of these stories more of, like, remember the one in the 80s called Amazing Stories, you know, the one Steven Spielberg did, or Tales of the Unexpected. The UK viewers will recognise that. It was a bit like a very low budget versions of them, because none of these stories were scary at all. They were mildly curious stories rather than scary, in an uninteresting location. So I'm giving this a 3 out of 10. I didn't do anything for me, this anthology film, and I suggest it's one to avoid if you are fans of horror anthology films as well, because this isn't going to win you over. So that is my review for Return to Horror Hotel. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you did, click the like button. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, and of course I'll see you next time on Screen Stars.